Wow, look at the time. Better get a move on. I know, but I've got to get to work, alright? Now, you be good. See you later.
Wake up.
Wake up! Wake up! Welcome to the Great 80s, a decade plagued by threats of impending nuclear war, the dawn of music television, questionable fashion choices, and a little gaming company called Nintendo. And you're sat there on your floral print couch or sofa, having unfurled the forever tangled nest of wires and cables, with that classic controller clutched in your hands. You'd saved up all of your allowance for months and convinced your parents that this would be the right thing to waste your money on. Yes, all spent on the brand spanking new Nintendo title, The Legend of Zelda. Wow, look at this. Those graphics are nothing to be sniffed at. You can explore? It certainly isn't safe to go alone, old man. I'll take that off your hands. Slash, slash, swoosh. Wow, this is great, isn't it? It really feels like something. An experience, if you will, that you'll never, ever forget. Let's just keep playing a little bit longer. Boom! Wake up, it's the 90s. Oh, you want pop culture? Well, you come to the right decade, my friend. Look at these iconic shows. Look at this fledgling startup search engine. Don't think it'll go anywhere though. Those gigantic phones. Wow, look at these fashion choices and look at that new PlayStation console. It's 1997 to be exact, and you're sat down on your beige sofa or couch, getting stuck into the mega behemoth of a game, Final Fantasy VII. This is groundbreaking stuff like nothing you've ever seen in a game before. You've sneaked and tiptoed your way down into the living room late at night just to play it into the early hours of the morning. You just can't get enough of that story, that turn-based combat, those incredible cutscenes. Yes, you are tired and your eyelids might slowly be slithering their way shut, but you won't fall asleep. Nope, Cloud needs you and you won't. Wait, is that a green tint? Xbox 360? Well, you must be in the 2000s. The new millennium is here, and with it, more affordable technology. Remember those phones? Well, now they're small enough to be in your pocket. The age of social media has just kicked into life, with many people left unsure as to how to use it. Pop culture had continued to explode into its popularity. The time of the girl or boy band was now over, solos ruling the charts. Even more questionable fashion choices, and you're here sat on your faux leather seat, wireless controller in hand, headset connected into the black plastic, and you look to your giant screen and on it is the brand new Halo 3. And while the story was good, you're more interested in joining your friend's online party to connect to a lobby filled with like-minded people, all with headsets, all hurling abuse in every direction. You missed that shot? What the are you aiming at, you... You play and play until it's 2 AM, speaking in hushed tones, not wanting to wake your parents up that are just upstairs. Nothing's better than this. Your gang of friends battling it out until the sun comes up. It almost feels nostalgic. Anyone fancy a private match? Shotgun red team.
No, I'm red team. Blue team sucks, man. You know that.
Maybe you just suck, man.
Look at my KD, bro. It's on top of the leaderboard.
Well, yeah, because you camp in one area all the time. It's easy to do. Try actually fighting someone one-on-one. Oh god, you're finally awake. Where am I? You're in the hospital. The hospital? Okay, this is gonna be a lot to take in, but you've been in a coma for quite some time. A coma? How long? It's been 21 years. 21 years? No, it can't be. I've missed so much. Okay, so, you've read the title and you're possibly thinking about how that unnecessarily long intro ties into the topic today. I'll tell you to spike confusion. It's all to do with an effect, a feeling that cannot be bottled, nostalgia. And Sonic, but we'll deal with nostalgia first. Now, nostalgia is an elusive being that only visits your mind in certain scenarios, and we'll talk about them. But for now, let's answer the opening question. What is nostalgia? For those who are unsure as to what the term pertains to, here's the definition via the Cambridge Dictionary. Nostalgia is a feeling of pleasure and also slight sadness when you think about things that happened in the past. And it's in the distant past we shall turn to for some historical context behind this term. Whilst the condition was well known long before its naming, being commonplace in the 30 Years' War, the term nostalgia was first used and established by Johannes Hofer in 1688. In the Swiss physician's medical dissertation published that year, he refers to it as a disease similar to paranoia, but with one major difference. Paranoia, for the lack of a better phrase, makes one paranoid, then being delusionally wary or afraid of being persecuted by others. Nostalgia instead afflicts the sufferer with a nigh unquenchable longing. Let's expand on that history with my own back alley definition. Nostalgia refers to the feeling you get when you look back on the happy times you have experienced in the past. You remember how you felt in those moments, the glee, the wonder. However, usually occurring after this burst of nostalgic happiness, you feel a little sad. You get this sense of longing to be sent back to those happier times, to live through them all over again. The sadness deriving from the fact that you could never possibly do that. These happy times can include your childhood school days, a nice family holiday, times where life was simpler, where you could put your feet up, chill with a chalky milk, controller in hand playing a game. And while you could never truly reverse time to get back there, you can replicate that feeling as best you can by setting up elements to recreate the scene you were in during those happier times. Now this may just be returning to the field you used to have kickabouts in as a kid, but in a purely gaming context, all you need is the game, a controller, and a system to play it on. And if that sounds simple, it's because it is. And that's exactly what I did when I downloaded and played the original, very first Sonic the Hedgehog a few days ago. No, I said the original Sonic. No, what even is that? No, this one. This is the original Sonic. You see, I, as a very small, very awkward child, never knew the wonders of gaming. In fact, I like to separate my life into two sections. The period of time before I knew how to press X to jump on a controller, and every single moment after that. And what's in between those two sections? What was the catalyst for this new major change in my life? The very first Sonic the Hedgehog. Who is Sonic the Hedgehog? Well, allow me to explain, and to explain we'll need to look at some context. Let's go back in time to the year 1990. Let's turn our attention away from all that pop culture to this small corner of history where the little game development company Sega resides. Founded on June the 3rd, 1960, the Japanese-based company had been rather prominent in the gaming sphere throughout the late 60s, 70s and 80s. This was due to their coin-operated games, or arcade machines to you and I. This might be lost on the younger generation, but upon entering an arcade in the early 2000s, you couldn't move for Sega titles, and that was way past their heyday. Back in the 70s and 80s, they dominated the arcade floor. However, a new challenger was approaching just beyond the horizon, the dreaded consoles. Upon the turn of the decade, as we entered into the 80s, consoles were everywhere, with systems like the Atari 2600 and the Nintendo Entertainment System garnering popularity across the world. Why pay endless amounts of coins into a machine when you can simply pay a lump sum for a whole new console with multiple iconic games? You no longer needed to travel into the big city anymore to play your favorite arcade game. Now it was within touching distance within your very own home. The consoles packaged with better controllers as compared to the arcade joysticks. Sega felt threatened, the biggest threat among them coming from Nintendo's new console. Originally releasing in 1983 for Japan, come 1987 the Nintendo Entertainment System, or the NES, had been released and sold worldwide, and would go on to sell over 61 million units, unheard of for a gaming console at that time. The gaming company behind the console, Nintendo, had created iconic character after iconic character, series and franchise franchises that still get new installments to this day, well over 3 decades later, and they were all first seen on this revolutionary console. Sega at this point knew they now had to adapt to the changing landscape of gaming. They had seen the benchmark Nintendo had set, the dominance they had wrestled from Sega's own arcade games, and they decided they were not just going to take this lying down. They released a couple of consoles in response to and alongside the NES, but were ultimately crowded out by their more solidly rooted competition. Sega's first console, the SG-1000, selling 1 unit for every 10 the NES sold. They needed to undercut Nintendo. They needed a new system with some killer selling points. Fast forward to 1986 and Sega were just beginning to start work on that new console system, with a team led by Masami Ishikawa and supervised by Hideki Sato. Together they decided that to stay competitive with their competition, they needed to up the graphical potential beyond that of their opposition, and they would do this with their new console, the Sega Genesis. How, you ask? Double the amount of bits the processor has. Now, for those of you who are not well versed in technologic terms, bits in a rather basic sense refers to the amount of information that can be stored and processed by a singular digital device. Therefore, a console system with a lower amount of bits would need to accommodate for this by reducing the quality of almost every aspect of their games. The graphics, the character models, even the music. Okay, for example, this is what an 8-bit game would look like, and this is what its music would sound like. In comparison, this is how a 16-bit game would look, and this is how the music would sound. And what you've just experienced there is the difference between Nintendo's 8-bit NES console and Sega's 16-bit Genesis console. There's a noticeable up in quality that Sega designers were excited to release to the world. And on October 26, 1988, the new Genesis console was released to a Japanese audience that would surely be clamoring for the next best thing. It was one of the most powerful consoles to ever be created at that time by a classic game developer with pedigree no less. It would surely be a hit. At least that's what Sega executives thought would happen. Instead, the Japanese consumer base apparently didn't care much for the additional power the console possessed, as the new Sega Genesis sold extremely poorly in its home country, only managing to shift around 400,000 units in its first year on the market. Let's compare the sales of the NES in its first year. Yes, 5 years prior to the release of the Genesis, the NES had sold over 2.5 million units during its first year on the Japanese market alone. Sources seem to conclude that the major reason for the low Genesis sales was the iron grip Nintendo and other systems available at the time had on the Japanese market. Also in Nintendo's favour was the fact that they were tailored more towards making what would be perceived to be children's games. This both appealed to the Japanese market and matched the public's perception of video games being something only children would play, whereas the Sega Genesis didn't fit into this model, the console being marketed to a much more mature audience. I also believe there was the issue of timing. There was almost a first come first serve mentality in customers. The consumer base were already invested in the franchises Nintendo had established during its 5-year head start on the Genesis. Providing that it is ultimately difficult to break a consumer's sense of loyalty, ask yourself this: why would you buy a new system from a different company just to miss out on new entries to your beloved franchises held on your old system? You most likely wouldn't want to swap systems, and the consumers back in 1988 agreed with this judgment. They didn't buy it, at least initially. So the sales in Japan hadn't gone to plan, but there was still a major market Sega could yet appeal to: the US of A. The console was brought to and released in the country in the year 1989 with grand expectations. These grand expectations were very high due to the target market being bigger here than it was in Japan, meaning more sales, and Sega really wanted those sales, coming in with advertising featuring major American celebrities at the time, with cutting taglines targeting the Nintendo counterpart. Genesis does what Nintendo don't. Rather canny stuff, but it was all to little avail. Sega had aimed for 1 million US sales within the first year of release there, but had only managed a measly 500,000. Things were, well, they were not going well for Sega. Yes, they had the more powerful console, but they were still getting outsold across the world by Nintendo, getting outsold by multiple companies back home, and they weren't even meeting their own sales targets. Adding to this, Nintendo had released their own 16-bit console in Japan in 1990, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or the SNES, negating one of Sega's only selling points they had over their competitor. And with the SNES set to be released in North America in August 1991, Sega needed something, anything, and they needed it fast. And something was coming, a game that would almost single-handedly turn the tables in this console war, the game that saved Sega, the game that would feature one of the most recognizable characters in not just gaming, but history. And that game would feature a certain speedy blue hedgehog in red running shoes that just so happens to go by the name of Sonic. Behind the scenes at Sega HQ, a plan was brewing. In-house competitions were held at Sega to create a mascot character for the Sega brand, a rival to Nintendo's mustachioed plumber, Mario. And for some reason they gravitated towards the idea of fast animals. Kangaroo? No, not fast enough. A squirrel? No, that doesn't sound right at all. Then all the ideas, the work of over 3 years of brainstorming, they all culminated into one fast animal. Yes, a rabbit. A rabbit that could use its ears to hold onto Okay, that idea was a little too difficult for the Genesis hardware to account for, but throughout the brainstorming process, Sega had come to settle on one particular gameplay mechanic. The animal had to be able to roll into a ball in order to attack its enemies with its spikes. This left only two choices of animal for the game team to pick from: armadillos and hedgehogs. A few designs for both animals were drafted, but it was the hedgehog design championed by Naoto Oshima which had prevailed, the hedgehog winning out over the armadillo, a tale as old as time. They made this hedgehog blue, they made him wear red and white shoes with buckles, the latter element drawing inspiration from the Bad album cover by Michael Jackson, the former colour scheme taken from Santa Claus. What am I reading? Yes, our blue hedgehog was set to be called Mr. Needlemouse. I don't know anymore. Okay, get back into it. He was originally called Mr. Needlemouse before the team settled on the name Sonic, the team behind the game adopting the name Sonic Team. Okay, let's get back on track. The character design had been settled, and so Sega developers had been put to work on a new title featuring our punk rock hedgehog here. Development continued until the game was released first for the US on the 23rd of June 1991, the decision being made to bundle the new title with all units of the Genesis console, pushing the game's reach even further. And boom, generous review scores aplenty, universal acclaim, sales flowing in like a river does to the sea. Everybody wanted to play it, to see its beautifully crafted 2D level designs, the personality the sprite displays, the iconic musical tracks that accompany you through every level. This was worthy of standing up to the console gaming juggernaut Nintendo had become. And the timing of the release was such an important factor here, Sonic releasing 2 months before the new Nintendo console, the SNES, was due to drop in America. It didn't completely topple Nintendo's dominance of this era, but the game shook the foundation of the whole gaming world in ways that have rarely been seen since. Sales of the Genesis system skyrocketed from there. At the time of the console's discontinuation, it had sold over 30 million units, with no small part being played by the spiky blue mammal. Eventually, even the marketing was kicking in.
Show me what you got, going fast is cool, don't slow it down.
Sonic, and by proxy Sega, was cool, and Nintendo was so yesterday, bro. Copies were flying off the shelves, the crowds went wild for Sonic. Sonic Mania had arrived, folks, and it wasn't stopping anytime soon, no. As the years went by since that very first game's release, Sonic the Hedgehog became a household name, the game becoming a franchise, that franchise spawning sequels, racing game spin-offs, 3D games, with varying levels of quality, animated TV, cartoons, comics, probably novels, and even even live-action movies starring big-name actors. And while Sega themselves would drop out of the console business altogether, Sonic was here to stay, and wedged in between all of these endless Sonic spin-offs was a little kid playing on one of Sega's failed consoles, the Sega Saturn, experiencing what games could be via a funny little hedgehog, and his quest to save all those other animals from an evil mad doctor. Sonic the Hedgehog was my very first game, and I was so late to the party, playing it a decade or so after the original release. And I can recall how my eyes would be glued to the screen constantly, how I would punch the air after every level, making sure to spin that sign as hard as I could for some extra points. I remember the satisfying pop of the container thing as I freed all the trapped animals, the crazy monster designs, and come on, that glorious music. What an incredible first game to have played. And as I grew up and the years rolled on, the Sonic franchise and I would occasionally collide at different stages of our respective lives. Yes, I may have skipped some games for better or for worse, but I always found myself returning to it after a certain amount of time, and I never stopped returning to the very first game in the series, the very first game these eyes saw up close, the most recent of these self-indulgent trips down memory lane, coming a mere few days ago. And while playing through each level once more, it all came flooding back to me, all the joy I had felt as a kid navigating this speedy blue hedgehog through these colourful levels all the way to the end of the game. And yet there was this sadness that I could never truly experience that sense of wonder again. I guess you could say I felt nostalgic. Now, you no doubt know what nostalgia is by now. I've explained the premise before, but what I haven't talked about is the effect it can have on you. And while we're at it, let's answer the question, is experiencing this feeling good or bad for you? And for this section, I'm going to come at you with both scientific facts and logic, and some of my own opinions. Alright then. Firstly, it's important to lay out the fact that feeling nostalgia is a very common occurrence for most of us. Southampton psychologist Dr. Sidicides and Tim Wildschut. Anyway, the pair conducted a study and they concluded that even children as young as 7 can experience nostalgia. They also found nostalgia to be a very personal experience, as those who are nostalgic will see themselves as the protagonist in their own joyful memories. It isn't entirely possible to be nostalgic for someone else's experiences. You will always be you, playing that game, not living vicariously through another. Also, most people were found to experience it at least once a week, nearly half of the study group experiencing it 3 to 4 times a week. Nostalgia is normal. Turning to the matter of whether nostalgia is bad for a person, well, although it was clearly said to be a debilitating illness throughout history, there are so many benefits to experiencing its harsh embrace. I'll even give you 5 of them for free. Okay, the first one comes once again from Dr. Sidicides. They state that the person who suffers from nostalgia usually retains an increased amount of empathy towards others. In the process, they also gain a stronger feeling of belonging and affiliation. Secondly, a 2012 study found that nostalgia reduces stress by giving people a greater bearing on their own lives, on their own place in this world. Deep. It's said to also help us during transitional periods of our lives, like moving on from adolescence into adulthood. That's number 3. Here's number 4. Phew, driving through them. Okay, 4. You get higher self-esteem, and therefore this leads to a greater level of happiness. And finally, coming in at number 5, flying in from China, research showed that nostalgia made people feel warmer. Not emotionally warmer, but physically. Nostalgia was shown to occur on colder days. Interessant. But forget all that, rip it all up, shred it, set fire to it for all I care. Yes, it's great to have both historical and scientific context behind what we feel in a certain moment, and how we feel it. But you know what the most important thing is? That you personally have your own experiences that give you that burst of happiness when you look back on them. I've spent the majority of this video quantifying what nostalgia means to me and what triggers it. I've given the timeline and history behind the game that sets it off in me in the most evidently observable way. Sonic the Hedgehog will always evoke these feelings in me. It represented my first step into the gaming universe, and as a child who's probably craving a new world to get lost in, I loved every single moment of it, and as an adult it's still one of my favourite games of all time. But that's my nostalgia, a personal experience that only I can truly draw happiness from in darker times. And although I'd like to find out, I have no idea what your nostalgia is. what it means to you. And I'd like everyone to find it, to find that happy memory that you can live through once more within your mind that takes you to a less stress-filled time. It could be the excitement you felt upon scoring a point in the dying embers of a game. It could be hanging out in that one particular street you and your friends always seem to gravitate to. That one compliment you got that always stuck with you. Your first visit to a cinema. The first time you gazed upon a spiky blue hedgehog and held the controller stick right to start your adventure. I hope you thought about those memories, but more than that, I hope you felt them also. For it is not enough to simply think about nostalgic times, but to experience them. For if to think is for us to exist, then it is to feel that makes us human.